Guys, welcome back. I'm super stoked that you are here and that I can finally share with you where we've been the last couple of months. I know that we were quiet and you're probably like, oh look, they fell off the map, they're not posting, it's over, it's done for. And in the past that would have been true, but not this time. November and December of 2024 were quiet for us in terms of posting content. However, we were working extremely diligently behind the scenes, making some key upgrades, specifically to the space and equipment that we have that are going to hopefully, fingers crossed, improve the quality of the content and hopefully the quantity of the content as well. So I'm super stoked that you're here. I want to share with you some of the key things that we did that are going to make things so much better for 2025. Let's get into it. If you've been following along, you'll know that in 2024, we were extremely busy. We launched our independent music project, Geraldine. We wrote, produced, mixed, and mastered 10 original songs. Those are on all major streaming platforms if you want to check them out. We also created and launched our very first podcast ever called The Early Morning Musician. Again, it's on all major streaming platforms. You should check it out if you haven't. And what the coolest part is, my favorite part about this whole thing, is the fact that we did it all ourselves. We did not outsource any part of the production, the mixing, the mastering, the shooting of the video, the editing of the video, none of that. We literally did it all ourselves and in our very own space. In fact, this space, this very room is where we did literally all of that. Now, as you can imagine, we spent an extreme amount of time in this room. I also work as a remote employee, and I spent a ton of time, basically my 9 to 5, which is really a lot more than 9 to 5. It starts quite a bit earlier, and oftentimes goes way beyond 5 o'clock. I worked in this room as well. So I spent a lot of time in this room, and I love this space. Now, this is just the typical room above the garage, bonus room, I think is what it's typically called. It's just a regular room in my house. There's a lot of things that I love about this space. It is fairly large. It's probably larger than the average bedroom. It's pretty big. I don't necessarily know the exact measurements, but I love the room. Relatively speaking, the room, even before we did anything to it, it was a fairly quiet room. I think it was because the ceiling is pitched a little bit, so it's like at an angle on several sides of the ceiling, and it also has a carpeted floor, which meant although it was reflective with no treatment up, it was able to keep the reflections extremely short. A lot of times when people would come up here, they'd be like, wow, this room sounds really quiet, and that's true, it was. So there was a lot of good things about this room. However, we noticed that there were a lot of drawbacks to this space. We found ourselves encountering some of the same hurdles over and over and over, the same headaches. The same point in the process was always the biggest hang up. It killed us on time. We found ourselves at the end of the year really scrambling to meet our deadlines, and it was because of these recurring issues that we encountered over and over and over again. The truth is, there were some things about this room that was making the process harder than it actually had to be. Now, if you're a creative or you know a creative, one thing is pretty true for all of us. We are typically looking for reasons to not create. It's such a weird thing being a creative. I love to create, but at the same time, I tend to be somewhat fickle. When I encounter an issue, I find it fairly debilitating. I'll typically procrastinate, or if I feel like things aren't hitting the mark, I just won't do it at all. I'm extremely all or nothing. So I recognized in starting these projects that if there was a problem that I could fix, I needed to jump on it sooner rather than later, because I wanted to make the process as easy as possible, because I wanted to remove roadblocks to help maintain consistency, especially in terms of posting content. We all know the name of the game today in 2025 is quantity and consistency. You really need to post a lot of content, and you need to do it on a regular basis. And in order to do that, I had to get rid of some of the roadblocks that I was encountering. So what we did is we decided that in the months of November and December, we were gonna take those 2 months off from posting and from doing the typical music creation process, besides a little bit of songwriting, and we were gonna focus on the space. We were gonna take these 2 months and we were going to diagnose what is wrong with this space? Why are we encountering these issues over and over? And then what are the solution to these issues? How are we able to fix these things? Are there solutions that the average person can afford and implement themselves? And then we needed the time to actually implement those solutions. So what were the issues that we were encountering? The first one, and maybe one of the larger ones, were room reflections. Reflections in a room are extremely detrimental to a lot of the processes of creating music, but definitely in terms of tracking music. And for us, specifically vocals, a lot of what we do in the box in terms of instruments, a lot of VSTs, VIs. But of course, in order to have a vocal, you gotta sing into a microphone, right? All these reflections really made it difficult because although the room, when you walk up here and you would talk before the room was treated, it sounded pretty quiet. But the moment you plugged in a microphone and started trying to record, you hit that record button, sounds totally normal, you hit play and listen back, all of a sudden you could actually hear what the room was doing. And although the reflections were short, they were pretty loud because we just literally had no acoustic treatment up. And the room was pretty large and pretty empty, like not really hardly any furniture at all, besides a couple of small things here and there. So we had to address that. These reflections also really reduced the options we had in terms of microphones. We couldn't just pick up any large diaphragm studio microphone and like start recording. We had to stick with dynamic microphones, specifically the SM7b. It's a great mic, sounded good, but it was really the only option we had because anything else that was maybe more sensitive, unusable, because the space just wouldn't allow it. The recordings would have been so reflective for the vocals, they just wouldn't be clean enough to do much with. So our mic options were extremely limited by our untreated room. We also had a lot of low-end issues. I'm assuming it was probably a conjunction of many things. The room being untreated, I feel like our speaker position also created some issues, as well as our mix position. I ended up having to do a ton of research to figure out what was going on, but essentially what it turned into was we could not hear the low end. Like as I was diving into kick drums and bass guitars and a lot of synth that had low end, I would do boosting and cutting and compression and saturation. I would do different things to low end to maintain it or make it louder or make it quieter, and I oftentimes struggled to hear the changes that I was making. I would have to reference my mix in a lot of different areas, in headphones, on cell phones, in cars, and it was just like I couldn't hear what I was doing. I ended up having to use some software tools that would enable me to actually see the frequencies and see how my changes were affecting those frequencies because I couldn't hear them with my ears, so I had to mix with my eyes. And if you know anything about mixing, you're not supposed to mix with your eyes. Unfortunately, sometimes we're forced into a position where we have to, but if you can avoid it, you definitely should. So the low end and not being able to hear it really made a lot of headache for us as we were trying to create. The room also just looked terrible. It was just like super empty. It had no vibe. There was really no furniture at all. It was mostly just like, had like an old glass desk, which is like bad idea probably to have that in your mixing space anyway. And then I also had just like an old metal filing cabinet. I have some stuff I have to file for work. Super reflective, probably not great in a room where you're trying to like track and mix and master vocals, but I was doing it. So the room just looked terrible. The furniture was extremely reflective. And when you're in a room so much, like I'm in this room all day, every day, for the room to look bad, it just made it almost unbearable. After I would have like 3 weeks of just being in this room for my job all day and then my creative projects in the morning and at night, it was just really hard mentally to be in a space that was ugly and uncomfortable. So I wanted to address that as well if time and funds allowed. So how did we fix these issues? Now we had to incorporate a few different solutions because there's obviously not one solution that was going to solve all of that for us. So we did a few key things, and this is what I'm excited to share with you. The first thing we did is we acoustically treated the space. I wasn't super knowledgeable about acoustic treatment and what all goes into it, so I had to spend quite a bit of time researching in forums, YouTube videos, different articles. There's a lot of speaker manufacturers that put out a lot of information about this, but ultimately what we ended up doing was purchasing a set of panels from ATS. I think they're called ATS Acoustics or ATS Panels. I ordered a lot of 2 foot by 4 foot and 2 foot by 2 foot panels. I think there were probably 30 in total, and I was able to treat this entire room. So I was able to treat most of the mix position, the wall behind the mix position, the wall back behind me, as well as installed a ceiling cloud. And really, when you kind of put all of these pieces together, it was remarkable. The difference that it made in this room that already seemed extremely quiet. I just thought it sounded quiet before. After I put up the acoustic treatment and then I spoke or I clapped my hands or whatever you wanted to do, it sounded unbelievable. It was so quiet and so clean. It just wasn't even comparable. I thought it was quiet. it wasn't quiet at all. It made a tremendous difference adding the acoustic treatment in terms of reflections. In conjunction with adding acoustic treatment, we also upgraded our speakers as well as incorporated a subwoofer and calibrated the entire system. Now this subject, there's way more than I can pack into this video. This is like kind of a broad overarching view of what all we did. So I'll probably make a separate video about the whole process, speaker selection, incorporating subwoofer, but all of that together, calibrating the speakers and the sub, as well as like the volume levels and the phase of the speakers all together and within the room, and adjusting the mix position with the acoustic treatment. Wow. Doing those things in conjunction, unbelievable. I pulled up several songs that I had loved and listened to over and over and over throughout the years, and there were several tracks that it was like listening to them for the first time. Like I had never heard what was going on sonically in the background. Even listening to them in cars and on headphones, there was still just stuff going on that I had never heard before. And it was really exciting to kind of like relive and like re-listen for the first time to a lot of these songs that I love, because I was finally able to hear what was going on. And definitely when you're producing and mixing and mastering, oftentimes we pull up reference mixes. It's extremely important to reference similar songs in the genre, so that way you kind of know what you're shooting for. And for the first time, I was playing back reference tracks, and it was like, oh, I can hear what they're doing. I can hear where they're panning different things. I could hear the way they were managing their low end. I could hear the way that they were compressing different things. I could hear different vocal layers that I had never been able to hear before. It was like a night and day difference when listening to music. So if you haven't done this yet, if you haven't acoustically treated your space, or if you haven't calibrated your speaker system, even if you don't have a sub, calibrating your speakers makes a huge difference in how it sounds. If you have not done those two things, I would highly recommend that you dive in, do the research, hang the panels. You know, hanging the panels wasn't a super fun process, but we got it done. I'll make a video about that later. It just made such a huge difference, those two things, in terms of being able to hear and know, and I can only imagine how much easier it is going to be able to create music in this space now that I can actually hear what I'm doing. And then lastly, we added a little bit of vibe to the room. We bought some furniture. We bought several things specifically for the podcast, kind of made it look a bit more like a set instead of just like a couple of dining room chairs pulled up to a wall with a blue light shine on them. We actually bought a little bit better lighting, got a couple of new chairs, got a couch, coffee table, several different things to just give the room more of a vibe. And believe it or not, having the upholstered thick furniture also helps with the sound as well, because that's going to absorb at least some sound. Now, furniture is no replacement for acoustic treatment. You definitely shouldn't think, oh, I can just buy a ton of furniture and my space will sound good. It doesn't quite do the same thing, but it does help to a degree. It just makes the room look and feel so much better. And if you're trying to be creative and be inspired, it really does help if the space that you're working in is clean, organized, and like has a vibe. And that's ultimately what we went with, and I feel like we finally have it. It's no longer just this white, drab, empty room, but instead the room has a little bit of flair to it. It looks good and it sounds unbelievable. So how will these upgrades affect things for us in 2025? Well, one is quality. We can hear what's going on now in a way that we couldn't before. We can reference mixes and actually hear what's going on in a way that we couldn't. So the quality of our music is definitely going to go up. Now, not just the quality, because we're also excited about the fact that we're going to be able to move faster. We're going to be able to bring you better songs at a faster rate without reducing the quality. That was always a big concern, was like, well, if we move any faster, or if we cut any corners on this process, or if we don't reference our stuff in enough places, it's not going to translate, it's not going to sound good, so it really slowed us down. Now we're going to be able to make a better product even faster than we could last year. And because of that, because the quality is going up and the speed is going up, ultimately this means that the quantity is going to be increased. We're going to be able to create more content, more songs, more episodes of the podcast, while having a better product that we're able to create faster. So we are super stoked about 2025 and all the things that we have planned for this year. Now, I'm going to make some individual videos for each piece of the upgrade to really dive down into the nitty gritty for those who are interested. So be on the lookout for videos on speaker placement and speaker type and calibration and room treatment and really all the things that went into this upgrade. If you're interested in doing anything like this for your own space at home so that you can create without having to wait on someone else or pay someone else for something, you can literally just do it on your own, on a budget. I'm gonna dive down into all those topics in the coming months, so be on the lookout for those videos. We're also really excited to bring on to the podcast some special guests that we have planned for this year. So we got a few more kinks to work out in order to incorporate those guests, but we're really excited, so be on the lookout for the next Early Morning Musician episode coming extremely soon. And of course, we have new Geraldine songs in the works, so be on the lookout. Thank you so much for joining in and watching the video. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, click the bell. I look forward to seeing you again next time.